Marcus Chen stood in his corner office on the 47th floor of the Harrison Tower, gazing out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. At 42 years old, he had everything a man could want: a tech company worth $300 million, a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, and a beautiful wife named Sarah whom he'd loved since college. His company, Chen Solutions, had revolutionized data security for small businesses. What started in a garage 12 years ago had become an empire. Marcus had clawed his way up from nothing, the son of immigrants who ran a small laundromat in Queens, to become one of the city's most respected entrepreneurs. Sarah had been there from the beginning. She'd believed in him when he was just a dreamer with a laptop and impossible ideas. She'd worked 2 jobs to support them while he coded through the nights. She'd celebrated every small victory and held him through every failure. When success finally came, Marcus made sure she wanted for nothing. But success changed things in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated, became consumed by the business, traveling constantly, missing dinners, forgetting anniversaries. Sarah, who had once been his partner in everything, now felt like a stranger living in their enormous apartment. She tried to tell him, tried to reconnect, but Marcus was always one meeting away, one deal away, one flight away. "Mr. Chen." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your wife is here. She says it's urgent." Marcus frowned. Sarah never came to the office. "Send her in." Sarah entered, and Marcus noticed immediately that something was wrong. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. She clutched a manila folder against her chest like a shield. "Sarah? What's wrong?" "I need to tell you something," she whispered. "I made a terrible mistake." Marcus's heart sank as she explained. Last month, a man named Richard Holbrook had approached her at a charity gala. He was charming, well-dressed, and claimed to be a venture capitalist. He'd talked about his admiration for Marcus's work, mentioned he was looking to invest in similar companies. Over several meetings Sarah had innocently believed were about business, Richard had earned her trust. "He said he wanted to surprise you with a massive investment," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "He showed me documents, portfolios, everything looked legitimate. He said the paperwork needed to be signed quickly because of tax reasons. I thought I was helping you. I thought I was finally contributing something meaningful to your success." Marcus felt ice forming in his veins. "What did you sign?" "He said it was a bridge loan agreement. He told me it would give Chen immediate capital for expansion, and that you'd be thrilled. I signed as an authorized representative. I used the power of attorney you gave me years ago." The folder dropped onto Marcus's desk. Inside were documents Sarah had signed, documents that used Chen assets as collateral for what she believed was a loan. But Marcus recognized the structure immediately. This wasn't a loan. These were transfer documents, disguised with complex legal language. Sarah had unknowingly signed away controlling interest in his company. "How much?" Marcus asked, his voice hollow. $50 million that I thought we were receiving as investment capital." But Marcus saw the truth in the fine print. Richard Holbrook didn't exist, at least not as the person he'd pretended to be. The company listed on the documents was a shell corporation. Someone had orchestrated an elaborate con, and Sarah, in her earnest desire to help and feel useful, had fallen for it completely. Marcus wanted to scream. He wanted to rage. But looking at Sarah's devastated face, he saw his own guilt reflected back at him. If he hadn't pushed her away, if he hadn't made her feel so useless and disconnected, would she have been so desperate to prove her worth? "I've already called the police," Sarah said. "And lawyers. They're trying to trace Holbrook, but the investigators say he's likely used multiple identities. The shell company is registered in the Cayman Islands. Marcus, I've destroyed everything you built. Everything." The next 3 months were a nightmare. The con was sophisticated and airtight. The power of attorney Sarah had used was legitimate. Marcus had given it to her years ago when he'd needed her to handle business matters during his frequent travels. The signatures were valid. The documents, while deceptive, were technically legal. Richard Holbrook had disappeared without a trace. Chenteca's board, smelling blood in the water, moved quickly. With the controlling interest transferred to the Shell Corporation, which immediately sold those shares to a consortium of Marcus's competitors, he lost control of his own company. The hostile takeover was swift and brutal. Marcus fought back with everything he had. He hired the best lawyers money could buy, but the legal fees were astronomical. He liquidated assets to fund the battle: the penthouse, the vacation homes, the art collection, the cars. Everything went to pay lawyers who ultimately told him the same thing: the documents were binding. The business press had a field day. Headlines screamed about the spectacular fall of Marcus Chen. Think pieces analyzed his downfall. Competitors he'd beaten in business smiled as they carved up his company's assets. Within 6 months, Marcus had gone from $300 million to nothing. Worse than nothing, he was in debt from legal fees, and Sarah moved into a modest apartment in Brooklyn, the kind of place he hadn't lived in since his early 20s. The silence between them was deafening. Sarah had apologized 1,000 times, but Marcus barely spoke. He wasn't sure what he felt: anger, betrayal, grief, all tangled together with the knowledge that he shared the blame. One night, Sarah packed a bag. "I'm going to stay with my sister," she said quietly. "I know you don't want me here. I know you can't even look at me. I don't blame you, Marcus. I destroyed your life's work. I'll sign whatever divorce papers you want to send." Marcus looked up from the laptop where he'd been sending out resumes. At 42, starting over felt impossible. But seeing Sarah leave felt worse. "Wait," he said. She stopped at the door. "I'm angry," Marcus admitted. "I'm furious and hurt, and I feel betrayed. But Sarah, I'm also sorry. I pushed you away for years. I made you feel invisible in our own marriage. You made a mistake trying to feel valuable again, and I made a mistake that led you there. That doesn't excuse what I did." "No," Marcus agreed. "But maybe we're both responsible for how we got here. Don't go. Let's figure this out together." Sarah dropped her bag and collapsed onto the worn couch, sobbing. Marcus sat beside her, and for the first time in months, they held each other. The next year was the hardest of Marcus's life. Took a job as a senior developer at a mid-sized tech firm for a fraction of what he'd once earned. Sarah worked as a paralegal, using the skills she developed during the legal battle. Together, they barely made enough to cover their modest rent and expenses. But something unexpected happened in the struggle. They remembered who they were together. They couldn't afford restaurants, so they cooked meals together, talking while chopping vegetables like they had in their first apartment. They couldn't afford Broadway shows, so they walked through the city, discovering neighborhoods they'd never explored. They couldn't afford much of anything, so they invested in each other. "I miss it sometimes," Marcus admitted one night as they ate takeout on their small balcony. "Not the money. Well, okay, I miss the money a little. But I miss building something. I miss creating." "What's stopping you?" Sarah asked. "Capital, for one thing. Credibility. The business world thinks I'm a joke now." "The business world thought you were a joke when you started Chentech too," Sarah pointed out. "You proved them wrong once. You could do it again." Marcus looked at his wife, really looked at her, and realized something he'd forgotten. Sarah had always been his best advisor. She saw possibilities he was too close to see. "I've been thinking about something," Marcus said slowly. "At work, I see these huge corporations struggling with AI integration. They're spending millions on consultants who don't understand their actual business needs. What if there was a way to democratize AI consulting? Make it accessible to smaller companies?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "Keep talking." They started brainstorming that night, and barely slept. Marcus began coding again, not for his employer, but for himself. Sarah researched markets and competitors. They worked in their tiny apartment, staying up late like they had when Chen was just a dream. But this time, it was different. This time, Sarah wasn't just supporting Marcus's dream. She was an equal partner, contributing ideas, challenging assumptions, shaping the vision. "We need to be smart about this," Sarah said one morning. "Last time, everything was in your name, and I was just there. If we're going to build something new, we build it together. Equal partners." Marcus nodded. Equal partners. 6 months later, Marcus and Sarah had a working prototype of their new platform, AI Navigator. It used machine learning to analyze a company's specific needs and create customized AI integration strategies at a fraction of the cost of traditional consultants. They'd bootstrapped everything, living on ramen and hope. Marcus had even swallowed his pride and reached out to former employees from Chen, the ones who'd been loyal, who'd been forced out during the takeover. Several came aboard, willing to work for equity instead of salary. But they needed capital to scale, and no investor would touch Marcus Chen. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Mr. Chen? This is Detective Sarah Rodriguez with the NYPD Fraud Division. We'd like you to come down to the station. It's about the Richard Holbrook case." Marcus hadn't heard that name in over a year. The investigation had gone cold. Months ago to the station, Detective Rodriguez explained. "We got him. Real name's Richard Castellano. He's run variations of this con across 3 states. Turns out he got sloppy with his last mark in Chicago. We traced his digital footprint back, and your wife's case was part of a pattern." That's good news," Marcus said, not sure why he'd been called in. "There's more," the detective continued. "When we arrested Castellano, we seized his assets. He'd moved most of the money offshore, but we recovered about $40 million that we can trace directly to various victims. Based on the documentation your wife provided and the size of your loss, you're entitled to a substantial portion of the recovered funds." Marcus felt the room spin. "How much?" "The exact amount is still being calculated, but our forensic accountants estimate you'll receive approximately $30 million. Marcus left the police station in a daze. $30 million. Not enough to buy back Chen. His former company was now worth over $1 billion, but enough to properly fund AI Navigator. Found Sarah at the paralegal office, where she worked, and told her the news. "We can get the apartment back," Sarah said immediately. "Maybe not the penthouse, but something nice. You can quit that job you hate." "We can," or Marcus interrupted, "we could invest it all in AI Navigator." Sarah stared at him. "All of it? We've proven we can live on less. We've built something real with nothing. Imagine what we could do with actual resources." "But Sarah, I meant what I said. Equal partners. This is your decision too." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, the same smile he'd fallen in love with 20 years ago. "Let's build an empire," she said. Together. With $30 million in capital, AI Navigator exploded. But Marcus and Sarah had learned hard lessons from the first time around. They built carefully, with checks and balances. They hired a CFO they trusted implicitly. They brought in a corporate attorney who reviewed every document 3 times. They created a board with independent directors. And most importantly, they stayed partners in every sense of the word. Navigator's timing was perfect. Small and medium-sized businesses were desperate to integrate AI but couldn't afford the consulting fees that big firms charged. Marcus's platform democratized access, and the market responded enthusiastically. Within a year, they had 10,000 clients. Within 2 years, 100,000. The platform evolved, incorporating new AI technologies as they emerged. Sarah proved to have a brilliant mind for business development and client relations. She became the face of the company while Marcus focused on technology and innovation. Tech magazines that had once written Marcus's obituary now chronicled his comeback. But the articles that Marcus appreciated most were the ones that recognized Sarah's contributions, that acknowledged her not as a CEO's wife, but as a co-founder and business leader in her own right. 3 years after losing everything, AI Navigator went public. The IPO valued the company at $8 billion. Marcus and Sarah, who each owned 40% of the company, were suddenly worth over $6 billion combined. Marcus Chen had become a billionaire. But the money, while nice, wasn't what mattered most to him anymore. The day after the IPO, Marcus woke up in their nice, but not ostentatious apartment in Brooklyn. They'd moved back to a better place, but deliberately chose to stay in the neighborhood where they'd rebuilt their lives. Sarah was already awake, sitting on the balcony with coffee. "We did it," she said as Marcus joined her. "We did," he agreed. "Do you forgive me?" Sarah asked suddenly. "I know we've moved forward, but you've never actually said it." Marcus took her hand. "Sarah, I forgave you a long time ago. Probably that night you tried to leave, when I realized I was as much to blame as you were. But maybe the real question is, do you forgive me?" "For what?" "For making you feel so invisible that you felt you had to prove your worth by signing documents you didn't understand. For putting business before our marriage. For taking you for granted for so many years." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I forgave you too. But Marcus, I need you to know something. Yes, I made a terrible mistake. It cost us everything we'd built. But in some ways, it was the best thing that ever happened to us." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure?" "We got each other back. We became real partners. We built something together, from the ground up, as equals. The first time around, Chen was your dream and I was just along for the ride. AI Navigator is our dream. Our accomplishment. Our success." Marcus realized she was right. Chen had made him a millionaire, but it had nearly cost him his marriage. AI Navigator had made them billionaires, but more importantly, it had given them back what they'd lost, each other. Plus, Sarah added with a wry smile, "we're worth a lot more now than we were before. So technically, my mistake was a pretty good investment." Marcus laughed, really laughed. For the first time in years, a few months later, Marcus and Sarah stood together on a stage at a tech conference. They'd been invited to speak about their journey, and Marcus had asked to share the platform equally with his wife. "People ask me how it feels to lose everything and then become a billionaire," Marcus said to the audience. "And I tell them the truth, losing everything was terrifying. But it taught me what really mattered." Sarah took the microphone. "We're not here to sugarcoat our story. I made a catastrophic mistake that cost my husband his company and our fortune. For a long time, I couldn't forgive myself. But I forgave her," Marcus continued, "because I finally understood that mistakes are only failures if we don't learn from them. Sarah's mistake destroyed one company, but it ultimately led to something bigger and better. More importantly, it saved our marriage." They told the audience about the hard year, the tiny apartment, the ramen dinners. They talked about learning to be partners again. They shared the lessons they'd learned about building businesses with integrity, about the importance of balance, about staying grounded. "Success isn't about never falling," Sarah said. "It's about what you do when you hit the ground." After the speech, a young entrepreneur approached them nervously. "Mr. Chen, Mrs. Chen," she said, "I just made a huge mistake in my startup. I trusted the wrong person with access to our accounts. We lost everything. I don't know if I can come back from this." Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look. "You can," Marcus said firmly. "But not alone. Do you have people who believe in you?" The young woman nodded, tears in her eyes. "My husband. He says we'll figure it out together." "Then you will," Sarah said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Trust me on this. Sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the greatest successes. You just have to be willing to learn, grow, and accept forgiveness, from others and from yourself."